Salve omnes. Here's our video number 1 on chapter 39. So what's in chapter 39? The perfect subjunctive in the active and both passive. And also the main grammatical point is on indirect questions. The PS is on Latin phrases in common use today. And the cultural reading is on the confiscations. Here's the chapter 39 checklist. Number 1, how to form the perfect subjunctive in the active. Take the third principal part stem, add the sound ERI, and then your endings MST, MUST, SNT. Number 2, how to form the perfect subjunctive passive for normal verbs. Fourth principal part plus helping verb, which is the present subjunctive of sum esse. Sim, si, sit, simus, situs, sint. What to do with deponent verbs, which will of course follow the passive endings, but be translated actively, like secuta sit. And then we have a list of interrogatives and the formula for indirect questions. Okay, so how to form the perfect active subjunctive. Well, you take the third principal part stem and drop off the long I. Then you add the ERI sound, airy, and then your personal endings, MST, MUSTIS, and T. So, how do we translate the perfect subjunctive? Well, it's usually just like the indicative. If you come across vocabularimus, where you have the ERI sound there, and it's usually going to show up in indirect questions, just translate it normally. So, we have called, or we did call, or we called. Now, in other subjunctive phrases, it might have the translation, we may have called. Now, this last note here, the perfect active subjunctive, is identical to the future perfect indicative, the will have verbed, except for one form, the first person singular, where for the subjunctive it's will call were am, but for the future perfect, will call wero, I will have called. Otherwise, they all have the ERI sound. Okay, now here's an example verb using the verb dico, dicere, dixi, dictus. Now you go to the third principal part, which is dixi. You drop off the long I to get your stem, which is dix. And you must add the ERI sound, and then simply MST, MUSTIS, and T. And remember, just normal translation usually. I said, or I have said, or I did say, all the way down. Although it sometimes can have the may have verbed translation. Now let's look at another verb. This is the verb, irregular verb sum esse fui futurus, but the good thing is that for all verbs, whether they're normal or irregular, they follow the same rules of formation. So you go to third principal part, fui, drop off the long I, you get fu or fu, add the ERI sound, and your endings, and there you have created the perfect active subjunctive for sum esse. In this chapter, they also want you to look at the verb fero, fere, tuli, latus, which is a very, very common verb, so please pay close attention to it. The verb to bear, carry, endure, report. So again, the third principal part is tuli, so you drop off the long I, you get tool, and to that you again add the ERI sound, and your endings MST, MUST, SNT. Pause and take a look at this. Okay, now let's compare what we just did, the perfect active subjunctive, with a much more commonly used subjunctive tense, the pluperfect active subjunctive. This is the one, it still uses the same stem, the third principal part stem, that's the perfect active stem, but now you add isse, and then your normal personal endings here. Here are some examples. Take a look at those. And then the translation of the pluperfect can be normal, like had verbed, but depending on the clause, it could be might have verbed or would have verbed. So again, this is the pluperfect active subjunctive. We're just reviewing this in this chapter to compare it with the perfect active. So again, third principal part stem, dixi, drop off the long I, add the short I, SSE, all the way down, and then your MST, MUSTS, and NT endings. Here's the verb sum esse, third person part, fui, drop off the long I, you get fu, add the isse sound, and that gives you the pluperfect active subjunctive. And lastly, the very common verb, fero feri tuli latus. The perfect active stem is tul, add the isse sound, and then the personal endings you need. So again, this could be normal. I had carried, or I would have carried, or I might have carried, depending on the clause that it's in. Okay, the bell means we're making a switch here. We're switching to the perfect passive subjunctive. So whenever you have a perfect passive or anything related to the passive for the perfect, you need to go to the fourth principal part, the PPP. And then you need a helping verb. And so here's a helping verb for the perfect passive subjunctive. Your helping verb is what is subjunctive, and it's the present subjunctive of the verb to be sim, si, sit, sima, si, sint. So remember si plus an ending, so Sports Illustrated plus an ending. And just like we saw in the active, the translation is usually the same as the indicative. So if you come across vocati simus, it's probably going to be translated, we have been called, or we were called. And again, it usually shows up in indirect questions, which we'll talk about in the next video. But again, in some subjunctive phrases, it could have the we may have been called translation. Alright, now let's take a look at our example verb again, the verb to say or speak. Dico, dicere, dixi, dictus. So you need to go to the fourth principal part. That's one of your forms. And it's usa depending on the gender of your subject. In the plural, of course, go I, a. And then Sports Illustrated is your helping verb, plus your MST, MUSTSNT. What is passive about this? Well, the fourth principal part is passive. What is subjunctive? The helping verb. So pause and take a look at the translations. Again, usually normal, although it could have the may have been verbed translation. Here's another example, the very common verb fero feri tuli latus aum. So again, you got to go to the fourth principal part, which is latus aum, in the plural, lati ia as subject endings, and then Sports Illustrated as your beginning of your helping verb, and then MST, MUSTSNT. So please pause the video and take a look at this verb. It's very, very common, very important for this chapter, and for learning how Latin is used. Now look here, ring the bell. We have a deponent verb. Remember, deponent verbs look passive, but are translated in the active. So here's the verb miror, mirare, mirate sum, to wonder. So if we're making the perfect passive subjunctive of this verb, you have to go to the perfect participle and put that all the way down, and then make it plural if we have a plural. But same helping verb, sim, si, sit, sim, si, sin. But notice your translation is all in the active. So if you go to Marati Aya Simas, would be we have wondered, or we did wonder, we wondered, or sometimes we may have wondered. Alright, we're switching gears again. Now we're going to talk about the pluperfect passive subjunctive. It's a review, but it's brought up again in this chapter to compare it with the perfect passive. So very similar to the perfect passive in that you use the fourth principal part, but what's different is the helping verb, using esse plus your endings MST, etc. Now that is the imperfect, by itself, is the imperfect subjunctive of the verb to be. So here I'll write it down below. But coupled with the fourth principal part, you've now created the pluperfect passive subjunctive. How do you translate it? Well, it's usually we had been called, but in many subjunctive phrases it could be we might have been called, or even we would have been called. It all depends on what subjunctive phrase you're in. That's why it's important to identify the clause. Okay, again, this is review. This is an example verb in the pluperfect passive subjunctive. Your fourth principal part here, plus your helping verb, SM is as the said, same as the said as sent. And here we have it for fera ferituli latus. Fourth pencil part here, plus your helping verb there. And here's our deponent verb, miror mirare mirate sum. Again, you get the perfect participle, and then couple it with the helping verb, SM is as the said, same as the said as sent, and they've created the pluperfect passive subjunctive. Okay, we're almost finished with video number 1. Take a look at these words, these phrases which are commonly used in English: data, post mortem, sub judice, obiter dicta, and in loco parentis. What do those mean? Please pause the video and then advance when you want to check your guesses. Alright, here are the answers. Data, of course, comes from the verb do, dare, dedidatus. It's the information literally given or provided from a study. Post mortem, well, after death. Sub judice, under a judge. This is said of a case that cannot be publicly discussed until it is finished. Obiter dicta, things said, that's dicta. Literally things having been said. Obiter means in passing. And in loco parentis means in place of a parent, assuming parental authority, which is actually what I do when I teach you. Okay, let's try it again with these phrases: de jure, de facto, sine die, nemine contradicente, magnum opus, and exeunt omnes. Please pause the video, try to figure them out, and advance when you want to check your responses. Okay, here are the answers. De jure, something done by the law. De facto, by deed. De facto refers to the way things really are, rather than what is officially presented as the fact. Sine die means something is without a fixed day, without a day determined. Nemine contradicente is an ambitive absolute, literally with no one speaking against, i.e. no one is dissenting. A magnum opus is an artistic term usually, it means a great work, i.e. someone's masterpiece. Exeunt omnes, everyone leaves the stage, that's the stage direction. By the way, going back to magnum opus, notice that opus is neuter. Okay, walete, and be sure to check out video 2 on the indirect questions.